My mother said this cruel sentence as if it were nothing more than an obvious fact. The knife kept tapping in a steady rhythm against the cutting board. She did not look up. She did not hesitate. Monica's family must always come first. And you? Come after. My father nodded immediately. No argument. No irritation. Just a familiar nod as if they had simply confirmed something everyone had known for a long time. I did not argue. I did not cry. I only said, I understand. And in that exact moment, I stopped waiting to be chosen. I pulled my money back. I pulled my time back. I even pulled back the plans that had once revolved around this family. My life split away clean, quiet. But before I tell you why they showed up at the door of my apartment a few days later, let me ask you this. Where are you watching this story from, and what time is it where you are right now? I read every single comment, so I know I am not telling this story alone, because I grew up in a family where the ranking never needed to be spoken aloud, and that night, it was spoken straight to my face. After that night, I did not disappear. I simply withdrew literally. No more Sunday dinners, no more late-night messages asking, "What are you doing?" I woke up earlier, went to work on time, and returned to my small apartment as the city began to cool down. Minneapolis in the cold season. Streetlights reflecting off thin layers of ice, forming long, quiet streaks of light. My apartment was so neat it was almost empty. One table, one chair, a soft yellow lamp in the evenings. I slowed my life down, not to escape, but to take control. For the first time in a long while, I did not have to brace myself to be asked for something, compared to someone else, or placed behind. This silence was different from before. It did not make me smaller. It gave me space to stand upright. I did not know that this calm was only a pause before a very familiar call-out. The Donovan family had never needed to name the hierarchy. It existed on its own. When Monica entered a room, the air shifted. Voices grew brighter. Conversations became smoother. My mother would often lean toward her, as if every important decision needed confirmation from that direction. My father would nod slow, firm, familiar. And me, I stood at the edge of conversations, not pushed out, but never pulled in. When I spoke, people listened just enough not to seem rude, but my opinions usually stopped mid-air. No one argued with them. No one accepted them either. Patrick often talked about their plans, buying a house, changing schools for their child, large expenses discussed as if they were a given. I listened. I remembered. Not out of curiosity, but because I knew sooner or later, those numbers would come looking for me in one way or another. The message arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, from my mother, Sunday, the whole family, something to discuss, no emojis, no explanation, no question about whether I was free. It sounded more like an appointment than an invitation. I put the phone down and looked out the window. Snow had started to fall, slow, steady, as if the city itself were preparing for something unavoidable. I did not reply right away, but that night, I charged my phone fully. I prepared myself to listen. I knew messages like this only appeared when something had slipped off course, and usually, the person being called in was not there to share good news. I wore a thicker coat that weekend. Not because of the cold, but because I knew I was about to step into a room where everyone was already seated. When I walked into the Donovan living room that Sunday, papers were already spread across the table neatly, silently, as if waiting for me to sign into a role they had chosen in advance. Some injustices do not need shouting. They repeat long enough to become the background. I did not immediately realize when I began to accept that position. I only know that, over time, I learned to stand slightly off-center, as if it were a form of politeness. Looking back, all the signs had been there very early, The year Monica turned 16, the entire street seemed brighter. A new car parked under the streetlight, its glossy paint reflecting a warm yellow glow. My mother stood beside it, phone in hand, telling my father to stand closer so the frame would feel complete. When Monica received the keys, her laughter burst out quick and clear like a declaration this future was worth investing in. I watched from the upstairs window. No one called me down. 6 months later. It was my 16th birthday. The kitchen light hummed softly. A small cake sat in the middle of the table. No candles. No waiting. My father slid a printed card toward me. "We are proud of you." I smiled, because I had learned how to do that. Not because I was happy, but because I knew the script. Monica had a moment. I had minimal acknowledgement, just enough to keep me from complaining. In the years that followed, that rule repeated itself in small details. When Monica needed tuition money, a check was written quickly, neatly. When I mentioned my own tuition, the conversation shifted to responsibility and independence. My mother said it like a compliment. I heard it as a boundary. I started working early, coming home late, saving every expense. No one stopped me, and no one asked how I was managing. At some dinners, Patrick talked about their upcoming plans, houses, schools, round numbers. My mother nodded. My father agreed. I added a comment. My voice touched the air and fell without an echo. No one rejected it. No one accepted it either. I understood my opinions existed, but they carried no weight. What confused me was not that Monica was prioritized. It was the way that priority was presented as reasonable, natural, as if I had chosen to stand behind. Gradually, I believed it. I adjusted my expectations, reduced my needs, learned to solve things myself before asking. And every time I managed, the family exhaled like the system was working as intended. Now, thinking back, I am not angry about the car or the cake. I realize I was taught an early lesson: if you stay silent long enough, people will call it maturity. And when you grow up too early, people forget that you also need to be chosen. When it came time for college, the family called it an investment in the future. The only thing was, that future always had Monica's name on it. Checks were written quickly, the numbers neatly rounded out. An apartment near campus was secured before the term began. My mother spoke about peace of mind. My father spoke about long-term vision. I sat there, memorizing how they described large expenses with words that sounded perfectly reasonable. When it was my turn, the tone changed. There was no more investment, only responsibility. My mother told me I was strong, independent. My father said taking care of myself would give me lasting value. I took 2 part-time jobs, enrolled in evening classes, organized my schedule like a spreadsheet. I learned to calculate every dollar, every hour of sleep. No one stopped me, and no one asked if I was tired. On late nights, I opened tuition confirmation emails, looked at the numbers, then closed them. I did not call home, not out of pride, but because I understood the rhythm when I managed on my own. Everyone felt relieved. When I did not ask, the system ran smoothly, and each time, I was praised for being fine, as if fine were the final destination. What I did not know was that this being fine would later be used as a reason to forget me once again. The day I graduated, the auditorium was brightly lit, gowns rustled. My name echoed amid applause from strangers. I crossed the stage alone. I did not see my parents in any row. I was not surprised. I already knew they were somewhere else. That weekend, the family was busy preparing for Monica's event. My mother called me in the middle of it. Her voice rushed. She congratulated me, said a few familiar lines, then hung up because there was something urgent. I stood in the parking lot, sunlight bouncing off the concrete. a hollow feeling spreading evenly through me. I was not angry. I took note. Relatives who met me afterward often said, "You're so lucky to have such a successful sister." They spoke as if Monica's light were enough to shine on the whole family. I smiled, nodded, and learned to stand slightly out of the frame. No one asked how I had made it to that day. No one asked what I wanted next. That night, I returned to my apartment and hung my gown over the back of a chair. The yellow light was steady. I made tea, sat down, and opened my notebook. I did not write big plans. I wrote only one line: "Do not wait to be invited." I understood then that their absence was not an oversight. It was the result of a familiar order. And if I continued to stay silent, that order would keep calling my name last, wrapped in praise that sounded perfectly proper. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The apartment was still quiet. Pale light filtered through the curtains, touching the bare surface of the table. I made coffee, listening to the steady sound of running water, the warmth spreading slowly through the air. There was no phone vibrating, no messages waiting for a reply. The feeling was unfamiliar not because of loneliness, but because I was not being called. I stood by the window, watching Minneapolis wake up. Snow still lingered on the steps. Cars passed by, leaving faint trails of fog on the glass. Everything moved according to its own rhythm, waiting for no one. I realized how used I had become to living in a state of waiting, waiting to be asked, waiting to be needed, waiting to be placed in the right position. And when no one called, I could finally hear my own breathing clearly. I used to think I was angry at my family, but sitting there with my coffee slowly cooling, I understood it was not anger. Anger requires hope. Hope that if you speak loudly enough, someone will change. I had passed that stage long ago. What remained was clarity. I looked back at all the times I had been fine, every time I managed on my own. My family felt relieved. Every time I did not ask. The system ran smoothly. My silence was not noble. It was convenient. And what is convenient is often preserved. I was not pushed out. I made myself smaller, because that kept everything calm. What made me stop was not a new sentence, but the old sentences repeating exactly the same way. Compliments that sounded positive, independent. Strong had covered something else. I was loved because I did not cause inconvenience. Realizing that, I felt lighter. No more need to prove. No more need to explain. When you understand the mechanism, you do not need to be angry at the gears. I was not looking for someone to blame. I was simply naming things correctly. And naming things correctly is the first step towards stepping somewhere else. Ava stopped by around noon. She set a bag of food on the table, without pressing me with questions. We ate slowly. When I told her everything, Ava did not interrupt. She said just one sentence, gentle and direct. "You don't have to stand where they leave space for you." That sentence stayed with me. I looked around the apartment, few things, but enough. Each item existed for a reason. I thought about boundaries, not as walls, but as a map. Boundaries show where I begin, and what is not my responsibility. When the map is clear, the path is no longer blurred. I opened my notebook and wrote a few short lines. Not big plans, just principles. Do not accept roles that have not been discussed. Do not replace consequences for other people's decisions. Do not trade peace for temporary harmony. Simple words. But once they were on paper, they carried weight. As evening came, I tidied up. The yellow light was steady. I placed my phone face down, not to hide, but to choose. For the first time, I did not ask myself what I should do to be accepted. I asked, does this belong to the life I want to build? That question did not make noise. It simply opened a straight path forward. The call came late in the afternoon, when the light in my apartment had already shifted. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I answered. unhurried. Her voice was fast, clipped, like she was reading through a to-do list. "There's a problem," she said. No greeting. No asking if it was a good time to talk. I heard papers being flipped. A sharp breath held back. Keywords fell out in steady intervals: overdue, notice, lawyer. My father took the phone partway through. His voice was lower, trying to stay calm. He talked about an unexpected situation, about how the family needs to stick together. I glanced at the clock. Everything was presented like a math problem: act quickly and it would be fine, delay, and the consequences would spread. No one said outright what they needed from me, but the way they paused mid-sentence long enough made it clear they expected me to fill in the rest. Then came the messages. Photos of documents, numbers circled. I zoomed in, read line by line. Some items I recognized, some were new. All of them were placed side by side like a single heavy mass. I did not reply immediately. I set the phone down, poured water, watched the steam rise. A familiar feeling returned, not panic, but anticipation. The kind that comes when you know a question is being carefully set up, just waiting for you to say yes. That evening, Ava stopped by. She looked at me and did not ask anything. I explained in an even tone, like reporting the weather. Ava nodded and set her bag down. "They're consolidating pressure," she said. I understood. When a crisis reaches a certain point, the old system activates automatically, and that system knows exactly who will step forward. The family meeting was scheduled for the weekend, not an invitation, a time slot. The familiar living room, chairs pulled close, papers spread evenly. My mother opened with a sentence she had clearly practiced: "We need a practical solution." My father followed, talking about responsibility and fairness. I sat upright, hands resting on my knees, listening as the tone shifted from worry to persuasion. They did not ask. They reasoned. "You're single. You have a stable job. You don't have the same expenses as Monica." Each statement stacked on top of the next, forming a conclusion that did not need to be spoken. Monica looked down. Patrick twirled his pen. No one objected. No one confirmed. Their silence was used as agreement. When I asked a simple question, "What is the long-term plan?" the air stalled. My mother talked about something temporary. My father talked about getting through a phase. The words slid past each other without meeting. I realized the pressure did not come from raised voices, but from logic repeated often enough. They called it family. I called it the old equation. The list of expenses was pushed toward me, yellow marker underlining deadlines, short time frames. I read, nodded, and placed it back exactly where it had been. No refusal, no promise. I asked one more thing. Who takes responsibility if this happens again? The question fell to the floor. No one picked it up. On the way home, I drove slowly. Red lights stretched longer than usual. I remembered earlier times when I said I was fine. Everyone exhaled in relief. This time, I did not say it. Ava looked at me, waiting. I took a deep breath. The pressure was doing exactly what it was designed to do: push me into a familiar role. But I could also see the outline of that role clearly. And when you see the outline, you know you can step aside. They thought I was figuring out how to help. In reality, I was figuring out how to reset the rules. That night, Ava and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table. No television, no background music. I spread the papers out, aligned neatly. The numbers no longer felt like a heavy mass. They became data. Ava asked, "Just one question. If you help, what do you want to change?" I needed to name what I was actually doing. Not rescuing, but restructuring responsibility. I drew 3 columns: tasks to address, conditions, consequences. Each line short and clear, no emotion. If there was support, it would be a loan with a defined term, a repayment schedule, and a reasonable interest rate. Not to punish, but to require seriousness. I added mandatory financial counseling, not because they were incapable, but because repeating mistakes could not be an option. Ava nodded as I continued writing about communication boundaries. All requests in writing, no urgent calls, no last-minute pressure. I realized I was doing something I had never done before, shaping the terms of help. Before, helping always came with sacrifice. This time, it came with transparency. When the page was full, I put the pen down. The feeling was not relief, but steadiness. I was not preparing a defense. I was preparing terms. Ava looked at me and smiled faintly. "This is the first time you're not stepping into the role they assigned," she said. I folded the paper and placed it into a plain folder, no label, no decoration, just order. I knew the reaction would not be pleasant, but if I did not offer structure, the pressure would keep calling my name. This time, I had an answer written in black ink on white paper, instead of the familiar silence. The meeting took place on Sunday afternoon. The living room had been tidied more than usual, as if order itself could make things less tangled. Chairs were pulled closer together, a low table set in the middle. My mother sat upright, her hands clasped together. My father held a stack of papers in front of him, the edges slightly bent from being gripped too tightly. Monica arrived a few minutes late, Patrick behind her, his gaze avoiding everyone. I arrived on time. Not early, not late. Ava sat beside me, silent. Her presence was not there to argue, but to witness. My mother opened in an even tone, emphasizing the word urgent. My father followed, speaking about responsibility, about family as a closed circle. Familiar phrases drifted through the room, looking for somewhere to settle. They presented the problem as if rehearsed. Numbers were read out, deadlines repeated. I listened and nodded at appropriate moments. I did not object. I did not agree. I let them finish. When silence appeared, it no longer felt uncomfortable. It was the necessary space before asking the right question. I asked about the long-term plan. My mother answered in circles. My father shifted to temporary. Monica looked down. Patrick twirled his pen. I placed my hand on my bag, feeling the smooth edge of the folder. I knew the moment had not yet arrived. Before talking about conditions, I needed to set the context. They had to understand what they were facing. They believed I could only help with money. They did not know I had brought proof. I opened my bag and placed the folder on the table. No sharp movement, no drama, just a clean motion. I spoke slowly. Before we discuss solutions, I need to clarify a few assumptions. Ava leaned forward, looking directly at the documents. My mother frowned. My father looked up. I opened the folder. The first statement slid out, neatly aligned. Then a summary sheet, simple charts, clear timelines, no decoration, no long annotations. I explained briefly income, allocation, reserves. I did not talk about effort. I talked about results. The numbers did their own work. My father picked up the first page and read. The sound of paper rustling was clear. He stopped mid-line and turned to the next page. My mother leaned in, lips pressed tight. "This is," she asked. I answered precisely, "My capacity." Nothing more. I placed another sheet on top, a projected repayment plan, cash flow, worst-case scenarios. I said, "If there is support, it only makes sense if the system changes." I did not use the word help. I used structure. Patrick opened his mouth, then fell silent. Monica looked up, her expression mixed. My mother asked why I had never said any of this before. I met her gaze. Because no one asked. The answer was not sharp. It was simply accurate. The room sagged. My father set the paper down, his hand trembling slightly. He did not argue. He was recalculating. I did not issue an ultimatum. I simply placed a new context on the table, the old assumptions that I was always available, always ready, always the last option were no longer valid. I added, "We can continue this conversation, but only if it is based on data and responsibility." The room went quiet. Not quiet because they were convinced, but because they needed time to adapt. I closed the folder and placed it neatly back on the table. Ava said nothing. She simply rested her hand beside the folder, like a period at the end of a sentence. I knew this was only the first layer of truth, and I also knew that once truth appears, it cannot be taken back. I did not wait for anyone to ask further. I placed another thin set of papers on the table light, but enough to shift the focus. "This is the full picture," I said, not raising my voice, not asking permission. I simply connected the pieces: stable cash flow, emergency reserves, simulated risk scenarios. I did not tell the journey. I presented the outcome. My father read more slowly this time. He underlined with his fingernail, as if he needed to touch the words to believe them. My mother looked at me, then at the papers, then back at me. That look was not blame, it was reorientation. Monica let out a very quiet breath. Patrick set his pen down, his hand empty. "So you were never backed into a corner?" my mother asked. I shook my head. "I wasn't backed in. I chose." The word "chose" landed on the table like a solid object. I continued, slowly. "And if there is support, it will only happen under the structure stated: a loan, a schedule, clear responsibility, no exceptions." My father looked up, his voice lowering. "You're setting conditions with your family." I nodded. "I'm setting boundaries. Conditions protect the relationship from repeating the same cycle." No one objected. They were measuring roles again, mine, and their own. My mother asked why I had not spoken earlier. I answered briefly. "Because when I was fine, everyone got used to relying on that." The sentence was aimed at no one. Yet it hit its mark. The silence stretched. I did not fill it. I let it do its work. I concluded, "The decision is yours. I am not rescuing. I am participating if, and only if, the structure is accepted." I stacked the papers again. Order returned to the table. No one stood up. No one gathered the documents. The room held its shape, like a photograph just frozen. My father leaned back in his chair and sighed, no longer hiding it. My mother rubbed her hands together, a small, repetitive motion, a sign she was learning a new rhythm. Monica looked at me this time without avoiding my eyes. Her gaze was no longer comparative. It was searching. Patrick asked a very specific question about interest. I answered with a number. No debate, no morality. The shift happened quietly from emotion to reality. Ava touched the edge of the table lightly. The touch was not to stop me, but to mark a passage. I stood up and gathered the folder. "We don't need to decide today," I said. "But if we continue, we will continue this way." I was not threatening. I was laying tracks. As I stepped toward the door, I heard my mother call my name, not to hold me back, but to confirm. I turned. She nodded very slightly. That nod did not promise anything. It acknowledged reality. I opened the door. Afternoon light poured in. Ava walked beside me, behind us. The room remained quiet, but it was no longer the familiar silence. It was the pause of people who had just realized the rules of the game had changed. Behind me, my father spoke, not to ask for mercy, but to ask terms if we sign. "What is the next step?" In the days after the meeting, The story no longer stayed in the living room. It moved outward through hesitant phone calls, through family meals marked by an unusual quiet. An aunt asked, "Is everything okay?" in a careful tone. An uncle mentioned a new plan as if it were a weather update. No one said anything directly, but everyone knew something had shifted. In the family group chat, the rhythm changed. There were no more urgent demands. Instead came tentative questions, complete with periods at the end. Requests were placed after words like, "May I?" I read them without reacting right away, not because of any new power, but because new rules need time to run, elsewhere. Monica and Patrick began to be asked gently but consistently about plans, about numbers, about next steps. Those questions had not existed before. They changed the air, no one accused. There was only reflection, like a light switched on in a corner of the room that had long been ignored. I did not appear to explain anything. I let consequences speak. And it was precisely that well-timed silence that made everyone understand the old order had closed. At a larger family gathering, my parents arrived early. They sat beside each other, no longer separating their chairs out of habit. When the conversation turned to recent difficulties, my father spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. My mother did not interrupt. The answers were brief, informative, no blame, no avoidance. Monica stayed quiet longer than usual. Patrick answered for her, then stopped when he realized he was talking too much. No one pushed, but the atmosphere demanded clarity. People who once only nodded now asked questions. Not sharp, just consistent. I realized something then: justice is not loud. It arrives through standards being applied evenly. When standards change, positions change with them. No takedowns required. No judgments needed. Just light. I sat at the edge of the table, listening. I did not speak. I did not guide. My presence alone was enough to remind everyone that the old assumptions no longer held. And that, in itself, was an answer. They used to think I belonged only behind the scenes. But the new rules did not distinguish seating. After the gathering, I left early. Not to avoid anyone, but to breathe. The city opened up in front of me, the familiar streets suddenly carrying a different depth. I stopped by a small cafe and ordered my usual. The barista remembered my name. Those simple details formed a space I did not need permission to belong to. An acquaintance greeted me and talked about an upcoming project. They asked for my opinion and waited. I answered briefly. No proving. No exaggerating. Trust came from how I set boundaries clear, steady. My phone vibrated. A carefully drafted message appeared, with a subject line and specific questions. I read it and replied with a single confirmation and a suitable time. No more, no less. The new rules were operating not through authority, but through correct habits. That evening, Ava asked, "How does it feel?" I thought for a moment. "Reasonable," I said. No loud satisfaction, just balance returning to its proper place. Justice becomes visible when everyone is held to the same standard and when I am no longer the exception used to patch the system. There was a morning when I woke up earlier than usual. Thin sunlight slid through the curtains and touched the surface of the wooden table. There were no urgent notifications, no messages that needed an immediate reply. I made coffee and stood by the window, listening to the city begin its rhythm steady, unhurried. I thought about the years before, when every decision had to be proven, not to outsiders, but to my own family. That feeling like carrying an invisible scale had disappeared without me noticing exactly when. I realized I no longer needed to win any arguments. Winning and losing only matter when you are still being pulled into comparison. Now, I am not seeking validation. I choose clarity, and clarity, when it arrives at the right time, brings with it a sense of lightness. Healing does not come through grand apologies. It comes through small changes, repeated. A question asked in the right place. A boundary respected without needing to be explained again. A meal that does not revolve around obligation. Ava and I took an afternoon walk, the same familiar route, but the wind that day felt cooler. She talked about her workday. I listened, not counting the time. Family, to me now, is a place that does not require me to tense up just to fit. I still keep in touch, but I no longer carry the old role. When there is a proposal, I ask about the goal. When emotions arise, I let them pass without anchoring myself to them. Healing is learning how to stay without being pulled backward, allowing relationships to exist within a new, healthier framework. In the evening, the apartment was lit just enough. A small potted plant sat on the windowsill. Ava bought it for a simple reason. Every new chapter needs something that's growing. I set my laptop aside and neatly folded the papers. There were no longer plans I had to defend, only choices I needed to live with. I realized that peace is not loud. It is the ability to end a day without asking whether I have done enough. It is the quiet confidence to say no and know that the relationship will still stand. My family may learn to walk differently, but whether they do or not, I will keep moving forward, not to leave them behind, but to stand in the right place for myself. Maturity, to me, is keeping a life rhythm that fits neither shrinking nor performing and allowing peace to become the default state. As the story comes to a close, I don't think about who was wrong. I think about what was right. Fairness is not being favored equally. Fairness is having the same standards and the right to say no without being punished by silence or guilt. Some families change because they want to. Others only change when one person stops carrying the load for everyone else. I did not fix them. I fixed the boundaries. And when boundaries stand firm, everything around them is forced to rearrange. If you have ever been the one who is always fine, the one who can handle it, the one who is told you can go last, remember this: maturity is not enduring better. It is choosing yourself at the right moment. Peace does not arrive when everyone understands you, but when you understand what you need and protect it all the way through. If this story resonated with you, let me know where you're watching from and at what time. Early morning, a lunch break, or a quiet evening. You can also share gently which boundary you once had to set to keep yourself intact. No debates, just to be heard. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can share with you many more meaningful and valuable stories in life. See you in the next story.